here, Data Protection Breakfast Club with your good buddy and a friend of mine as well, Sachin Kothari, longtime AT&T guy, and now the
Yeah.
chief privacy officer at Johnson Controls, which is one of the largest companies in the world that people don't know so much about, but
Yeah.
a massive company. And
Yeah.
he's the CPO, so I learned a ton. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, he's awesome, man. And like what I like about him is that he's kind of quiet about his business. He's understated, like no fireworks. He's the opposite of me in a lot of ways, like not a lot of antics, right? He's just very like kind of methodically going about his job and career. And he's done some really great things, man. Some of the conversations I've had with him over the years about the work they did at AT&T, like, listen, man, there's some very edge case data privacy issues come up at company like that all over the place from a variety of angles. And he was at the helm of a lot of it there. And then now at Johnson Controls, I'm sure we'll ask him about this, but like the IoT business that company has, it's like a Honeywell type of company, if that helps people kind of as a point of reference, or like a GE kind of like just touching all sorts of industries and all sorts of data coming in through IoT and other devices that the company manufactures. And like he's got a big job. He's got a big job.
Yeah, and they own a lot of companies, and there's a lot of data at play. And it's also interesting to see the way you go. He was at AT&T for 18 years or 19 years or something, and that company shifted so much during that time. Um, just to when you hang that long through that type of transition, it means that you're doing something right because people are listening to you. That's a very seismic shift. And then to go on to this company that has the breadth and scope that it does, and take the job on that he's taken on, um, you just have to be able to think a different way. I think that's
Yeah.
what it comes down to. Like we talked about this maybe a little bit on at the end of our last show when we talked about how people at Salesforce conceived of the idea to potentially buy Slack. Like people are thinking differently about stuff than maybe we are sometimes. And
Mhm.
he's definitely one of these people that is thinking on a scale that, or is able to think on a scale that, not everybody can think on that scale. It's
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, and he definitely is a strategic minded person, and he lives in strategy. Like, I can be really tactical. I think you can be really great at a lot of things. That's tactical, operational, and strategic. I think Sachin's brain is wired for strategy. I think he just lives at the whatever intergalactic level of analysis, looking down at all the moving parts and trying to figure out how they fit. And I'm sure he'll talk about some of this stuff because that's his bread and butter, and how his brain is wired.
awesome. All right, here we go.
Let's go.
All right, here we are. The Data Protection
We're here.
Club, Sachin, Kothari, and Pedro, here to talk about 80s hip hop and maybe a little data privacy as well. But we got into it about Eric B and Rakim before we started, so we just pushed record because this was good. Pick up, Pedro. You were talking about Rakim.
No, Sasha was telling us about like, well, go ahead, Sasha, like about Rakim and how young he was when he got started and comparing it to
Yeah,
his kid.
I know. I was just thinking of my kids, and I think he was 17 when he made that song, and the lyrics are just beautiful, right? It's like painting a canvas with those words, and and it just I mean, I'm not saying I love my kids, right? But getting my kids to from a tennis lesson to a piano lesson would be like their painting canvas moment, right? I can't, it just, I think the creativity that flowed out with these lyrics was just mind bending, particularly at such a young age. That's a true.
Amazing.
I love Rakim, and I'm so glad we got a hip hop song in here, and I'm glad it's you, Sergeant, on this episode because I know you know a lot about this stuff. But like, my whole identity is tied into like late '80s, early '90s rap music. Like
Yeah.
to me that was like my Americanization, because I wasn't born here and shit. But like, so for me, like when I see Rakim, I just think of the people I looked up to when I was a kid. Yeah. And I know you kind of share that with me. And yeah, man, I'm just super proud that like even in our little privacy world, we can talk about this and it now be like mainstream relevant. Like it makes me super
Right.
excited. And Andy, I love that boombox. I'll tell you a cool story. my grandmother had a boombox just like that when I was a little boy. My grandparents had a farm in South Florida. We lived on this farm. My grandma had a boombox. Now I want you to picture like a late 60s Cuban lady with a boombox like that on a farm in Florida playing Mexican love ballads because that's her favorite music.
Oh,
I'll never forget. It was one of the best holiday gifts I ever got. I think I was like 8 or something. I got a box just like the one behind me, and I lost it. I was like,
Yeah.
rap music, 80s music, like, I mean, I just listened to like a mix of whatever. And then as I got older, I got different and better, as I got older. But I still never forget. It's one of the best gifts I've ever gotten.
Same here.
I hear you, man. Like I even had like the like a double decker. What do you call it? Like that had 2 tapes. You could,
Oh.
if you had
record from one tape to the other. Yeah.
I'm like, well, let me copy that. I love that deck, right? And the ability to record when a song comes on the radio, it's like it's like the little DJ in me just kind of came like, oh, I gotta get the song.
How old? So speaking of Rakim being really young, how old was Max Schrems when he filed his initial complaint?
Right.
I mean, he's not Rakim, but
No,
he's
definitely not
had an
Rakim.
impact. He has had an impact, whether you dig it or not.
No, I totally agree. And look, man, he's gonna have a long career and probably do some more interesting things. That's a cool analogy, by the way. I mean, shout out to Rakim being way cooler than Max Schrems, but like, I get the point. I get the sentiment. You know what? Your boombox made me think of something. I'm gonna do a little corporate plug, and they don't sponsor this podcast, but I have a Discover card, and a lot of people make fun of me. They're like, "Well, that's like mom credit card," but look at my Discover card. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Anyway, shout out to Discover Card. Feel free to sponsor the podcast. We'll take the cash.
I bet you Rakim is so old he uses Discover now.
I think Rakim lives in a cash moneyless economy, man. I think he just kind of moves around and does his own thing.
Yeah.
I'd love to see him featured in Where Are They Now?
You picked the song, Pedro. Why don't you tee it up and kick it off here?
Well, let me tell you, like, we've done a lot of these and so far, and it's always been with our friends, but I gotta say, like, Sasha is one of my closest friends. I'm super excited that he's here with us today. We've had a lot of great times together, and we met on the privacy circuit, but like, we hit it off. Like, I mean, we know each other's families. Like, we when we go to conferences, honestly, like, I love going just to hang out with you, and also like your mentorship and help, even in deciding to come work at Facebook. Andy, obviously you're in that same sphere, like on my board of directors, but so is Sasha. Like, Sasha is the guy I'm like, how are we going to do this? Is this the right thing? Keep me smart here. And I'm just really excited that you agreed to join us, man. So like, for me, it's like an honor to have like you here, and I'm kind of humbled by the fact that you said yes. So thanks for joining, man.
Oh, absolutely. How could I not do this? I mean, kidding me? It's like the only thing I've been jealous of, like, man, like, what's up? How come Pedro and Andy's doing? It's like, Andy, come on, we're show some love here, right? So
yeah. Well, I was waiting.
Something with you, Andy.
I was waiting till we shifted to music, because we first did movies, and I don't know your movie vibes, but I know your music vibes. So I was like, as soon as we do music, like, that's when we need to get Sasha in here. So that's kind of why the delay. Also, like, we've polished. We're like better at this now, and so like, I think it's like a cool time to get you on here. But
no, absolutely. I'm just giving Andy a hard time, but no, absolutely. This is great.
Andy didn't want you here. Like, I kept saying your name, and Andy was like, "Man, screw that guy. He's a jerk." I was like, "Nah, man." So I had to pay him $50, and then here we are. So I always tee up with some random question. I know we've been talking about random stuff, so one more random thing, and then we'll get into your career, because I know it's super interesting and people are going to want to hear about it. But like, if we're talking 80s hip hop, Sasha, like, do you have a favorite artist, favorite song? Like, what's your vibe?
Ooh, that's a tough one, man. There's so many. Look, hip hop and 80s. I can't just think of one genre. Right? Like, I mean, I don't know if I've shared this with you. One of the things that I still love music, right? But on the side, as going through school, I supported myself, was also being a DJ. right?
I didn't know this.
Yeah, I mean, it's, this is not no, Paul Oakenfold, the main Paul Van Dyke type of stuff, but just a more of a side kind of fun gig, So it was fun. So, but I love music. So there, back to your question, I don't think there's, especially the '80s. I can't name a single one like to go to song. I mean, it's a potpourri. I mean, the thing is, it's not just a potpourri of rap, but for me, it's a potpourri of rock, rap, I mean, hip hop, and these genres that were just starting to build, even on the EDM side, right? It was back in the
Love
day.
some EDM.
Yeah, it's like techno, or it's but it was still building, right, in the stages. So it was like a house and techno. So it's like I kind of have a potpourri of so many different genres that
I think when you're the ages that we are, and we came up in the 80s and in the 80s and the 90s, that's when you're forming your opinions about things, and music is a big part of that. Like
yeah,
your
huge.
parents talking to you about, I discovered my parents' record player, and they had all this like Beatles and Zeppelin and like actual original records and Woodstock records, and like, but they had an eclectic mix. They had like some folk music, and they had some like hard rock, and they had all sorts of stuff. And so I got to play around with it. And then when you get into older, there's cassette singles and the boom boxes and all the stuff that we grew up with. And I think I couldn't agree with that assessment more, because you're just experimenting and learning and listening to stuff and figuring out what you like, and maybe what you like a little more or less. It's a great time.
What about you, Andy? Did you have like a favorite artist or?
Um, I mean, not necessarily. I think I got when I was in like, I don't know, I like Guns N' Roses came out, like kind of the
I love Guns N' Roses.
destruction, right? Like when I was in that formative age, and that's not to say I just like that kind of music, but like that was a pretty powerful record when that comes out. And the first time I remember watching MTV and seeing the video for Paradise City and Sweet Child of Mine, and like those are some of the first videos. They're showing a lifestyle I could never imagine, and it's just that was the first. I have an indelible memory of those for sure.
I'd say for me, like in the late '80s, I mean, LL Cool J and
Yeah.
now LL Cool J for me was pretty big, but I'll say like, and I probably shouldn't have been listening to this when I was 6 or 7 years old, but I love Ice-T, man. Like I just love Ice-T. I remember seeing one of his album covers, and he was like on some fancy, I think it was like a Corvette or something, like bikini clad women, like total tropes and awful stereotypes. But I grew up in neighborhoods where like I thought that was the most amazing thing as a kid. I was like, oh my God. And then you listen to Ice-T, and there's a lot of political undertones to some of his music, and kind of, the rebelliousness of it really resonated with me.
Did you guys experiment with like, I mean, like Hammer? I mean, like,
Yeah.
like
I wore Hammer pants,
all
man.
this stuff happened. You can't avoid it. You can't say I just liked Ice-T, right? Because
I wore Z Cavariccis, those weird pants.
Did, and I know you guys listen to Parents Just Don't Understand, and like that album spoke to me. Like my parents don't understand. They don't.
They still don't, by the way. They still don't. But yeah, no, that's a good recap on music, man. I really want to get into Sachin's career, because he spent like ad tech wise, you're a deep mind. Sachin, why don't you tell us like how you ended up at AT&T, and maybe like, since you did so many different things, like maybe just give us some of the highlights.
It's funny, man. Just in privacy, it's as AT&T was going through its own transformation, I was going through my own transformation, right? And particularly in data privacy. So one of the first AT&T I was with the company for almost 20 years. So it's one of the first gigs, second, third, but one of the major gigs I had coming out of school. And I really, I first started in program management of looking at policies. This is, if you can, back in the day, about 24 years, 22 years ago, when AT&T, if you remember it was broken up into silos, right? You had Ameritech, you had Pacific Bell, Nevada Bell, New England Bell, Southwestern Bell, and they were just in the clubs of coming together, right? And that's when I entered the company. So one of the first things, like, oh, Sachin, perfect timing. All these companies have their own little privacy notices, but can you just help us create one and, we'll just use that one, right? Easy job. So in that cluster, okay, sounds interesting. But as you kind of open the layer by layer, you start to notice every telco operated differently, right? Even from operational things, what they considered personal information was so different from Southwestern Bell to New England Bell to Nevada Bell. So it wasn't just having a one policy, it was literally changing the entire operational framework for 5 subsidies, right? It's not, you can just slap a policy together and say, hey, here it is, right? So, but that also entailed severe painstaking amount of negotiations with these presidents who've been at the helm of this regional telco for 20, 30 years, right? And they're like, who are you to tell me how to run my company, right? So there was a lot of that. And then there's a lot of, okay, let's come to a consistent framework. So I think that was my first kind of operational deep dive to say, wait a minute, it's more than just words. We've got to actually make sure we're doing this. How do we efficiently do it? How do we consistently do it? How do the customers see us doing it? How do we internally do this, right? So that was my first kind of, wasn't really thinking of privacy, but it's more just operations, right? The strategic operations. And, speeding through that transition, as we started to grow, we're looking at mobility acquisitions, right? And then the DirecTV acquisitions came about. And then particularly that's when we're in the midst of ad tech, right? And I think I don't know how others do it, but as a major provider, we were probably one of the first ones to put a framework on ad tech together, right? I mean, literally, I had a governance process that looked at every publisher, every ad agency, what type of technology landscape it was using, down to the weeds of, are they using JavaScript? What are they collecting? How long are they keeping it, right? And literally ran them through a governance framework. So in a nutshell, when ad tech started to explode, right? I would say around, for AT&T is almost about 10, 12 years ago. We had an amazing framework for it, right? So that really kind of helped us drive some of the bargaining, some of the negotiations with some of the big companies, specifically even in Facebook or even in Google. Like we had some contracts that when negotiated for over 2 years, right? Because they couldn't come to agreement. And GDPR happened, look, you could do it for GDPR, you certainly could do it for us, right? So they're like, oh, okay, and then customize the offering, no native tags, we'll customize offerings and what have you. So it was really cool. So with AT&T, I really got to kind of play in so many different fields, and particularly with a company that's regulated in the U.S. by 2 major agencies like the FCC and FTC. There was a lot of cross barriers to pass through, right? In terms of CP&I, which is customer network and proprietary information, that's the telco data, right? And then there was ad tech data. And then there was specifically even experiences on all the promotional sales that were happening, saying under FTC Section 5, are we offering one click away advertising disclosures and what have you, right? So I got to play in all of these spaces, which was, it was painstaking at times, but in terms of understanding, being able to know what's going on under the hood, what the expectation is, and then doing it at a mass market level was phenomenal. So
what's interesting? Yeah. What's super interesting, Andy, is like, I'm listening to Sachin talk about all of this stuff, and it's such a different perspective than what most of our guests talk about, because most of our guests, like me and you, are kind of on the front end of ad tech, right? Like Q apps or, the actual ads themselves, which AT&T touches that stuff too. But like a lot of what Sachin is talking about is like the back end, right? Like the piping of all of this, the infrastructure that goes into making the internet happen, nevertheless, like ad networks and advertisements. And it was super interesting to hear about like all of the inside baseball of combining all of these components of AT&T into one cohesive privacy strategy, while at the same time dealing with all the external stakeholders that me and Andy are used to talking about on this podcast. I just don't know how companies like AT&T, Verizon, and some of the big, like, huge infrastructure players, I don't know how you guys do it. I don't know. It just feels like, I don't know, Andy, it feels like too big a problem, too big a mission.
Well, let Sachin talk a little more, but my sense is that it is, having been in both big and little companies, I think my sense is that it's like any really large, messy project that just kind of goes in fits and starts. A lot of people have to weigh in. It takes a long time. You make progress, you go backwards, you make progress, you go backwards. Things change, things evolve, they change, they shift again. You buy a company, things change again. Litigation happens, you change again. I mean, it's just this long evolutionary process. And to me, it always ends up being more about mindset shift than anything else. There's obviously the people doing the work and like figuring out what data is in what part of the organization, and what as you mentioned, doing contracts and things like that. But there's this mindset shift that has to happen, and particularly in a company, certain companies where you're like, okay, we are kind of a data company now, and that takes a long period of time to shift.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, and particularly, when you were look at it from a perspective, like look, we talked about ad tech, we talked about having from a customer's perspective. Look, they're a customer. They might have a landline with you, they might have a mobile device with you, or they might have just internet with you, right? They just want the experience to be able to have these mechanisms of being able to control their data, right? Now, when you look at companies like AT&T, who's been in the industry for a long time, you've got these old legacy systems, and you've got all of these new systems, these new applications, new APIs plugging in, and they don't always cooperate, right? So, but when it comes to customer expectations, they're like, hey, I want to go to one place and do this, like whether it's consent mechanisms to be able to say, hey, this is what I want to do for related to advertising ability. This is what I want you to do for my permission marketing. This is what I expect for sharing my CP&I. I'm just going to go here. I want to be able to press a couple of clicks and do it, right? It's a nightmare on the back end when you've got 30 different systems that are managing this, right? Trying to come up with one unique experience. So it's definitely challenging.
To Andy's point about culture shift, and you use different terminology, but I think we're saying the same thing. Like, how do you, from a privacy seat, right? Like, how do you drive privacy consciousness in an organization that's disparate like that? Like, how do you get it? How do you do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, from my perspective, I've always taken the discipline of being an enabler. So even, privacy being jointed at the hip on different parts of legal, we're looked at sometimes as very much as a defensive posture, saying, oh, they're going to be the ones that say no, right? But you two are completely different, right? But most other companies' cultures it's very much, hey, this is a protective mechanism. Let's make sure we're doing X, Y, Z. But whether it's myself or my team, I always have kind of embedded this thought process, saying, hey, show them we're here to help, right? We're here to enable a business, right? And once you are able to articulate that with a very specific data strategy, I think that is what entails getting cooperation, collaboration, folks to be able to say, okay, I get it. This is what we need to do, right? But if you come in with this posture of, okay, well, look, I understand you want to do this, but legal obligations or these parameters allow us to only use this, and kind of leave it there, right? But if you're constantly, if your clients, your constituents see you as someone who is really there to help them versus make it hard for them, immediate collaboration comes out. And I've seen this kind of, I've seen this evolve through, right? And there's definitely still, even when I go to these privacy conferences, I'll still see and hear folks about really much of a defensive posture and not so much of an offensive posture, right? Even when they're talking about what to go to the board with, right? Well, look at all the great things we're doing. But my question always comes back to them saying, okay, you're doing all this stuff, right? You're doing all these tons of assessments, you're helping litigation, you're helping this, but what are you doing to drive growth, right? And then they're thinking and thinking, well, and they struggle with that answer, right? So in back to your question, Pedro, I think if you're able to drive that question in terms of a growth strategy, even with what you're doing as a defensive posture, but still focus and show how this defensive posture helps your offense, is what changes the game, and it changes the collaboration and cooperation from your constituents.
I'd like your take on that, Pedro. Now you're a few weeks into a new gig where it's a policy job, and not, it's different than a straight up lawyer job. Have you experienced that difference? I mean, you and I, the three of us, are cut from the same cloth. Like, help the business get things done. Do not stand in the way. As you said, show your value on the offense, right? Get close to revenue, get close to product. Have you experienced a difference with being in a policy role versus a legal role?
Yeah, I mean, it's early, but there is a different. There's definitely it's hard to explain, but yes, the answer is yes. And I'm in the ads. I run the ads policy team, which, if you want to get close to revenue, work in ads at Facebook, right? I mean, like, it is the revenue. And so there's a lot of pressure on my team to deliver on actionable policy that helps the company continue to grow and thrive. I think Sasha made some great points, and one of them that I wholeheartedly agree with is that whether you're coming from the legal department's perspective, or a privacy practitioner perspective, or a policy perspective, your strategy, whether as an individual or on your own, in your organization, has to be to enable the business goals, as long as they're ethical and lawful, right? Like that, to enable those goals. And one thing that I've always been adamant about, and I know you guys are the same, is that, like, reactiveness is not a strategy. So waiting for things to happen to you and then addressing them is not a good way to grow a business and thrive and continue to be successful. And then the other one is silence is not a strategy, right? Like, just saying nothing and doing nothing is also not strategy. So I think, interestingly, on Facebook, I've only been here a little while, but a lot of energy is being put into anticipating challenges and addressing them ahead of time to get out in front of the next privacy challenges that all tech companies are going to face. And I love to have the opportunity to be a part of that kind of crystal balling and making sure some of the mistakes of the past aren't repeated, right? And I think that guidance comes all the way from the very top in my company, but I know that I'm seeing that same shift in all of privacy, which is, I think, for the last 10 years or so, especially ad tech, but all of privacy has been very much like, well, let's react to problems, let's react to data breaches, let's react to new regulation. And now it's like, okay, well, how do we help shape the future in a way that is both privacy friendly and privacy conscious, and also allows businesses to operate? So I think the answer is, I agree with Sasha. Like, I like the idea of, like, providing a good defense means immersing yourself in the offense, because you just have to do it. Otherwise, you're just a blocker. And first of all, nobody wants to work with blockers. But more importantly, blocking things doesn't achieve anything, like, in and of itself, right? So I just don't think it's extremely productive to approach our roles, whether it's from the policy, legal, or business side, as what we can't do. More to think about it like, what can we enable, and how do we configure things so we don't keep running into things we shouldn't do or can't do.
I'm curious about your shift from AT&T to Johnson Controls, and what that was like to be somewhere so long and then go to a company that has different things going on.
Yeah.
Into a CPO role. I'm just really curious about that, because I'm not sure everyone necessarily knows exactly what your current company does, but it's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I think like I'd like to hear that, like it's clear to me maybe why you thought it was interesting to go there. I'd like it'd be cool to hear more.
Yeah, no, no, I think that's a great question. Like this change happened, believe it or not, very organically, and you know, I wasn't even um, anticipating making such a shift change, right? And this opportunity came up, and a recruiter knocked on my door, and I'll be honest, I didn't know what Johnson Controls was
Yeah.
before, right? And not a lot of people do, right? And I knew they were an industrial manufacturing business, but beyond that, that's where my knowledge stopped, right? But as I dug in and I looked at the rec of the position, I said, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like the Johnson Controls I know, right? And I dug in more. And look, I'll put it this way. Look, after being in 20 years in the business, very consumer focused, right? In telco and ad tech and entertainment and some of the using some of the most edge use cases, right? But still, for me, what was missing was the ability to work in IoT, not just talk about it, but actually be in it, right? And to be there in the infancy, set these parameters, set these frameworks. Same thing with AI, facial recognition. And my mind as a big technology technophile, I love technology changes, particularly like this, particularly all automation, right? And that's exactly what Johnson Controls is. And and I thought about this. Wow, this is exactly what I always had saying working in this space. I want to really do this at a multinational stage. On top of that, right? AT&T is very U.S. focused. So believe it or not, this particular role kind of, in my mind, checked off every box that I had anticipated build up in the back of my mind, right? Um, and it was a very organic move. So for me, so I was like, wow, this makes sense. You know, almost do it for free because this is what I love. This is what I want to get
I
into.
wouldn't go that far.
Let's calm down on free.
Okay,
As
all
your,
right, all right.
as your agent, I'm gonna veto
Got
that
it.
one because I need my 10%. But Sasha, let me ask you one thing. Let me ask a question about
Yeah.
what you just you mentioned something that you and I talked about in your new role a bit, and I think would be super interesting for our audience, which is like the intersection of your work now with biometrics. You mentioned facial recognition, but biometrics more broadly. I know it's been an area of focus for you since you joined Johnson Controls. Just interested in getting a sense from you about like where you see privacy and biometrics heading, how it is going to impact Internet of Things and the things that you guys are doing at Johnson Controls, but also just at large. Like,
Yeah.
biometrics is such an interesting topic, and you're right in the middle of it. So, share.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a great question. You know, right now, look, when we, as observers, when we see biometrics, what do we see? We see nothing but bans in these kind of these edge use cases that are misusing the data points, right? And that's all we hear about, right? We don't necessarily always hear about the good that it's bringing. But look, when it comes to regulations, biometrics, particularly in Europe, there's already is a regulation known as GDPR that stipulates exactly how you can use it in what form, right? North America, US is one of the fewest countries that we haven't really tackled this issue, right? That's why we're starting to see flavors of these local regulations, these bans surface, what have you. But I almost compare it to ad tech, right? Like in ad tech, what's happening, right? Like, look, there's the self-governance regulation that people were saying we'll comply to this consortium, and this is how we'll honor consent mechanisms and transparency and what have you, right? Now, because of the technology usage and the rapid shift, you know, that's being challenged, right? But what are regulators doing? In my mind, regulators are going after the edge use cases. They're going after bans, right? And technology use cases. And I think same thing's happening in biometrics, where they're looking, particularly in the public sector, they're looking to mitigate this by surfacing these bans. And what's happening, technology is getting around it, right? Now you saw, I mean, last week I saw an article in New York Times about a government agency using these what do you call it? The things that fly and you just control
drones.
Drones, yeah, they're using AI-enabled drones now, right? To combat this, right? That has facial recognition and it has all these things associated with it, right? But my point is, if regulations are still going after these technology bans, they're never going to chase it. Technology will always evolve and rapidly evolve. They have to kind of really kind of focus on frameworks. So first of all, I think if you can articulate this, like by a company that's manufacturing this stuff, if you're able to integrate privacy from the get-go, that is the way to really achieve the complexity. Look, from our perspective, we have various regulations. So whether it's in the APAC region or EMEA or other regions, the way the products are going to be utilized by our customers may change, right? But as long as, let's think of it in more simplistic terms, as long as we're developing the widgets, the capabilities behind these to allow the customer to implement these in a legal way, right? That's when we can get it right, right? And that's what we're seeing it happen over and over. So yeah, I mean, look, I mean, it's unfortunate the few bad actors are having influence over the folks like others that are using these technologies, these capabilities in the right context. But you know, it's just, I think overall regulators, as long as they kind of come back and just with that tech and look at it more of a framework basis, more and a capability basis versus going after the edge cases, I think we're still going to be kind of like the cat chasing its tail environment.
How do you do that at scale? Like your company's so big, so global, so many products, owns other company, you know, like owns other companies and business lines, and you're participating in many different markets, you know, and marketplaces. And I can't imagine the privacy team is that big. How do you do that? Plus
Right.
these novel issues, right? Like, how do you do that?
No, absolutely. You know, I would put it this way, Andy. Look, it's not a single, like I talked about privacy by design, right? It's not a single perspective. It's a multi-pronged approach. When we develop these commercial products and services, it's not about just doing a privacy impact assessment, right? It also encompasses training, encompasses literature or data privacy sheets for the product itself to show, you know, what the transparency is behind, who's our sub-processors, where is this information being stored and shared, right? So I think along with being able to develop a product right way and providing that transparency behind the product, and at the same time providing training and talking to your customer, right, on how to achieve this global compliance and and navigate through the global complexity of regulations we have around the world, right? So if you're there and at the same time you put in postures such as frameworks, at the same time looking at certifications, right, whether it's on the data privacy side or on the security side, if you're achieving certifications, I think that holistically kind of puts you as a competitive advantage and ability to kind of have your customers look at you and say, okay, you've done all these things, so therefore your products are trustworthy and are be able to integrate it across our ecosystem of offices around the world, right?
How many times a day are you surprised?
Well, listen, I mean, being a little over a year into this job, I've learned a lot, right? And just like any company, everyone has its corporate cultural differences, right? So being surprised, I would say the frequency has definitely gone down, but it hasn't gone away.
That's every job. That's every
Yeah.
job. It's certainly every job with data involved for sure.
Yeah, but back to Pedro's question, or if Andy, you asked, but being in a role of a CPO, you know, it's like, you know, before we were able to just focus on, hey, this aspect of commercialization or this aspect of a framework, but now I've got, you know, everything from looking at employee data, HR data, to looking at any type of breach scenario and incidences, along with commercially providing guidance to our businesses and internal employees, right? So it's at a multinational stage, right? So, and obviously from a privacy standpoint, there are certain jurisdictions are just, employees are just more savvy, more customer, more privacy savvy than others. So you get these questions from subject access rights requests to ability to say, hey, how are we doing this? And they want the double click, they want the triple click into understanding more, right? So balancing that is always a major challenge at times, but
It ain't no joke.
no,
It ain't no joke, man. That's a good way. That's a good way to put a bow on this conversation.
no joke for
We,
sure.
we do have to wrap it up, but Pedro, last words. You want to ask anything else?
No, man. Hey, Sachin, thanks for joining us, man. I can't wait to see you in person again. The three of us getting a drink at a conference is like a dream of mine that we need to do soon.
Crazy, right?
And I miss you. I miss you both, man. I can't wait to see you guys in person soon.
You, buddy. You too. Definitely.
Thanks
Thanks for having me on, guys. This has been fun. I talked to you guys for hours, but we'll hopefully pick this up and not virtually, but in over a drink or so.
Can't wait.
All right, guys.
Awesome. Hey, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, brother.
All right, guys. Thanks. Talk soon. Bye.
Later.